Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Tips and Tricks Opendatasoft workshop. We're just waiting a few seconds so everyone can connect, and we'll get started right away. Okay, so I am Mayara Suarez. I'm a part of the Customer Success Manager team here in Opendatasoft, and I have the pleasure to already work a lot with some of you. And hopefully we'll get to meet you all soon. And I'll be doing this workshop today with my colleague Philippe Vaillant, who is also on the customer success team. So just a quick logistics detail. So we're using this tool today, GoToWebinar, and everyone will be, all attendees are in mute. So there's no issue with the sound, but if you have any questions, please, as we go, don't hesitate to write them in the chat. So you have on your configuration control panel, you have a chat at the bottom, and you can type a message there, and we'll be looking at them as we go, as we move forward, and we'll be answering them in the end of this workshop. So the goal of today is to share with you some best practices and good habits for maximizing your time and autonomy on the platform. A quick reminder that this workshop is for beginners and intermediate level, but we'll be also doing, moving forward, a workshop more on some advanced aspects and functionalities of the platform. So we'll be sending you more information on that later on. But for now, so for today, it's more of everything related to more beginner and intermediate level. The workshop will be divided in two parts. The first one will be done by me and the second one by Philippe. I'll start by sharing with you some best practices that you should adopt when you're publishing and exploring your datasets. And then Philippe will move on and share some how-tos on use some of our functionalities that help you create, customize, and share data and content. All right, so let's get started on the first part. First best practice I want to share today is how to enable sorting and filtering options for your dataset fields. So I've chosen today to use a dataset on Airbnb listings in Switzerland. I'm gonna go to the back office. I've already published it, but I'll be showing, I'll be doing the processing part with you. Here. So here I have on my processing tab all the fields for this dataset. First thing I want to look at is if the field is correctly configured. So for example, here I have a field for the room ID. And well, here it's telling me that it's a numeric field, but it's not necessarily something that we would want to do calculations with. So I'm going to use it as text because it's just an ID. Then I have a field with the name of the Airbnb listing that is already configured as text. I'm going to select it as a filter on the front office. And I'm also going to allow it to be sortable. So we may do that by checking this box here on the configuration tab. Same for host ID. I'll turn it as text. And I'll also add the neighborhood as a filter. It is already on text, and I'll also make it sortable. And I might even then allow multiple selection of filters if I want to look at multiple neighborhoods at a time. Same for room type. And for my numeric fields then, for the ones that tell me the room price, the minimum night stay, the number of reviews, they're already in the numeric configuration, so it's fine. Then I have a date field. That is the date of the last review. that I'll also add as a filter. And finally, the city and the updated date. So for the date fields, there's also a best practice that we wanted to show you today. I'm just gonna go ahead and do it while I'm doing this filter configuration, which is to allow our users to select a date range. So I'll show you just in a minute how it looks in the front office, but besides allowing this field to become a filter, displaying the date range would also allow them to select a certain period of time that they would want to look into. Okay, so my configuration is done. I save and publish and wait a little bit. Okay, taking a little bit of time, but we can go ahead and start exploring. So now it's just telling me that some records are being added, but I can already see that I have all my filters here on the left. And I have the date range field here for the updated date. And also on my table view, some of the fields that I selected are sortable. So for example, the name, I can sort, for example, on the alphabetic order. And here there are some characters that are different. So it will start by that, and then it will list on a certain order. And same if I look backwards here, I start at Z, go on Y, etc. So same for neighborhood. Okay. And all my numeric fields are by default also sortable. Okay. Then if I want to look at my date range filter, so for example, I can imagine if I want to see all listings that were updated, let's say, oh, sorry, let's say starting on May 1st. So I see that actually they haven't been, there are 0 records that have been updated lately. And also the importance of configuring some fields and declaring them as filter is also so that we go to the Analyze tab. And now we can use those fields as access to do analysis and comparisons. So for example, here I'm going to use the city field. I'm going to use a column chart. And I'm going to see by city what is the average room price. So here I have 2 cities. I can see that the city of Vaud in Switzerland is a little bit more expensive when it comes to Airbnb listings. And I can also imagine breakdown series with the ones that I've declared as filters as well. So for example, the room type, right? So here I can see, for example, that the most expensive are hotel rooms, but that there's also an interesting part that shared rooms in Geneva are, for some reason, more expensive than private rooms on an average room price. Okay, so this is the first part on the filter configuration. The second one was the time range filter that I've done it at the same time. We'll be sending you these slides as a support so that you will also have more detailed descriptions after the webinar. And then the third one is specify a title for your tooltips. So if we go back to our data set here and we click on the map, we'll see that if we zoom in to a specific point and we click on the tooltip, the one that is showing to me by default is well, the order that it's finding on the table view. So it's starting with the room ID. This is not optimal because, well, the room ID probably won't be won't speak to my user as something else like the name would. So what I can do very easily is go back to my dataset configuration, to my visualizations, and on the map part, I can select the title of my tooltip. So here, let's say, I'm going to say it's the name. So similar to what we would find in Airbnb, you would have the big title with the name on the top. And then you can select the displayed fields or even erase some of them if you don't believe they're relevant. So for example, here, I'd like to erase room ID, host ID, and eventually reorganize and say that the updated date is also important and will be my second field. So as I mentioned earlier, this is more for beginners and intermediate level, but if you wanted to go a little further and build a more customized tooltip, you could select the custom HTML tooltip here, and it would open to you the HTML editor. And as many of you may know, we have the discovery page that give you some templates and some tips to do some more advanced stuff with the platform. And one of them, for example, is this custom tooltip. So here, if you look, we have 3 examples for you. One of them is even similar to this Airbnb case, where you would see a list of hotels and you would have a more advanced tooltip than showing the name or even linking, adding a link at the bottom in case there's a link on your data set. In order to do that, you would only need to copy and paste it on the visualization tab I was just in. And then you would change here the fields of the records that you would want to show. And eventually, of course, the icons that you would want to associate it with. So this would be more for an advanced workshop, but just so you know that it's also a possibility. Okay. And save and publish. Okay. The 4th best practice on this part is how to quickly identify problematic fields with ODS query language. So we took 3 examples to show you, but you could find more of those also on our documentation that you would have the link here. The first one is the now query, which displays records that correspond to a current date or in relation to that specific date. So if I go back to my data set first, let's see if it's published. Yes. If I refresh, I'll now be able to see the tooltip that I just configured. Yes. Okay. And then let's say, looking at the table view, let's say I would want to know which records or which listings were updated in the last 2 years, for example. So in order to know that, first I need to go to the information tab and look at my dataset scheme. And now look for the name of the ID, the technical ID of the field that I want to use my query on. So this is updated date. And going to my filters, then let's say, for example, I want to look at all of those that have an updated date that is either superior or equal to now and for the last 2 years. So this is all documented, right? So you could see in the documentation how I built this expression. And if I search for it, let me see again. Oh, it's updated. Okay. I believe it's because, yeah, all of my, if I look at updated date, yeah. So all my records are listed in the past month, actually. Okay. The next query would be if I wanted to display empty records, for example. So if I want to find, if I have a problem with a certain record and I want to make sure I can find which ones don't display a certain value. So for this, same, I would go back to my information tab and look at the field that I would like to use. So for example, if I take the ones that don't have any reviews per month, for example, and I say no and the name of the field. So now I'm only showing 1,700 records. And if I look at the table view, I'll see that, well, all of those listed don't have any value for this field. And also I could relate and then see that they also don't have any reviews at all, right? And finally, on the last query is if you want to display a record that corresponds exactly to a specific value. So in this case, imagine that I want to see all of those that have a price of 50. So if I use the query here, sorry, it's a bit slow. So it's only showing now 250 records. And what might be interesting is that then I do this query and now I look at my Analyze tab. And so instead of looking at the average room per price, I can just do a count and it will show to me by city those that have a room or a listing that correspond exactly to the price that I want. So for example, I have a better chance of finding a room for $50 in the city of Vaud instead of Geneva. Okay, moving on. The fifth best practice is related to the monitoring dashboard. So for all of those of you that administrate the portal and have to follow the statistics of usage, this is done in the back office, as many of you know. If you go to the analytics menu, for example, in users, so here you will find a pre-built dashboard already with the data for the past month and where you can see the activities, certain indicators on the activity of your users. So the number of total users, the period where they were most active, how many anonymous users your portal has. But what's also very interesting is that you can go and see the source data. If you go to the source data, it will open a data set just like one you would have on your portal. And it will open with a query already on the past month, but you can take it out and it will show you the past 3 months. And here you could go, so you have certain filters here on the left, and you could go on the Analyze tab and use those filters to dig deeper on your analysis. So for example, if you choose as an x-axis the user ID, and you want to see then, so it's counting the number of API calls. So you would see, for example, that Elodie here is the user that has the most numbers of API calls for this domain. And I could also, for example, break it down by attributes. So attributes are all the pages of the domain. So here, if I stack it normal, I can see that, well, it's Elodie that spends the most time on this domain, but she also does it mainly on the map builder, right? And then all other users are more focused on the Explore tab, which is the catalog page. And finally, so that I give the floor to Philippe, is one small tip that has recently been added, and maybe you've seen it in your Beamer notification Beamer on the right. It's the possibility of renaming your processors. So the goal is that if, for example, and some of you might have a lot of processors added for a specific data set, and if they're all called the same, it was sometimes a bit difficult to find the one that you would want to modify. So now you can rename it very easily, and it will help you find your way through better. I'll just quickly do an example. So in the processing tab, imagine, for example, here on my last field that I have a location. Imagine if I didn't have the neighborhood field on this data set and I wanted to extract the neighborhood from here. So I would go ahead and add a processor that would split the text. I would choose, sorry, it's still loading. All right, it's a bit slow. But anyway, I would choose the field location in a minute, but I would also add as a separator the comma, and I would put as index the number 3 because I want the third element. And I would then create a new field called, let's say, area, because I already have the field neighborhood, so I don't want it to be a problem. And I'll just go here and select location. So here you would see, I would then have a new field called area that I could choose to add as a filter or not. And the rename processor functionality would allow me to just say, so this is creation of area field. And I give the little check. And now the next time I come, I know exactly what this processor is doing. So save and publish. Okay, so this is all for me. I'll go and look ahead and see if you had any questions. I'll then give the floor to Philippe, who will get you started on some how-tos to help you create and share content on Opendatasoft. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayara. Yes, just regarding the questions, you can ask your questions, typing the question on the GoToMeeting tool, and we'll answer most of them today. And if there are questions that remain unanswered, we will do it later by email. So we'll do that. And just a quick note, I think Vaud and Geneva are regions, cantons, I don't know how you pronounce that, not cities. So if there are any Swiss people watching today, just to precise that. So Mayara has presented more day-to-day habits that you should have when you publish or you browse your catalog. And now I will show more one-shot configurations that you can do and that will improve the navigation of your users and enable maybe new usages. The first thing I will present is how to add base maps. Maybe you have noticed that some portals you can toggle between base maps. So here I'm on the Jersey City Open Data Portal, and I have 3 different base maps I can toggle between. Those base maps are actually standard base map that you can activate on your portal. But those are not the only base maps you can use. And if we go, for example, on the portal of the city of Kingston in Canada, you can see that you have here a very a more customized base map. It's only for the region of Kingston. And you can also toggle with an S3 base map if you are an S3 user. Sometimes you will choose to not let your users toggle between base maps because you want a consistent view on all your pages. So this is also possible. If you do have a GIS department that has a lot of very detailed base map, using, for example, a WMS format. If you haven't heard of WMS format, no worries at all. But generally, if you have GIS departments, it's likely that they do have specific tiles. Tiles are just images that you serve online, and you can ask them, well, do we have WMS feeds? Do we want to add that on our open data portal? And they can tell you. If your GIS department doesn't have that, it's also likely that maybe some other organization has it. So if I still taking the example of Vancouver, we can imagine that the province of British Columbia has WMS services. So here I just looked on Google if they do have some WMS tiles, and I see that they have some information. So I can just click on they have imagery web map services, imagery spot, Landsat services, and I decided to add a completely customized base map on my portal. So in the back office, on the left hand side, under the menu look and feel and the submenu data visualizations, I can see that below the section on chart colors, I have immediately a section on base maps. And I can find here all the base maps that I've configured on my portal. So here I've configured like 4, 5, 6 even base maps. I can choose between default base maps, so street, sunny, light, dark. So let's see how it changes. You have an overview here between a light mode, a dark mode, and I can name it. Also some like artsy base map like this. And I can choose a completely customized under this WMS format that we just talked about. And in the case of British Columbia, we can see that the start of the URL is the gov.bc.ca. The layer name in this case is not really helping us. It's just called 0, but that happens. But if I go in the front office now, and if I'm looking at the data sets on Vancouver, I can now toggle and choose this new base map. And I see that I have this very precise transport base map. The one that I've chosen from the British Columbia website is a transport base map. And why would that be interesting is, well, maybe your transportation department said, well, we would like to use the Open Data Portal more and, for example, embed some maps, custom maps about, I don't know, roadworks or traffic in Vancouver. But to embed that, we would like it to have this specific base map that tells more about transportation that's just the joke street or joke lights. So now I choose this transportation base map and I can do embed on my Open Data Portal or any institutional websites. So that's for the base map. Then in the same section, you have something very interesting as well. It's the chart color. If you want to be consistent throughout your entire portal and throughout your entire services, you may want to use colors that are specific to your organizations. If you have a set of colors that are used everywhere in your website, in your services, you can say, well, I will add those colors. And in my graphs, I will always use those. So I can choose from the color wheel or just type the hexadecimal code. And once I have chosen a set of colors, I can just save everything I've done. And when I'm on a chart builder, then the color that I suggested to me will be the one that I have saved. Here I've only chosen 2 colors, so it's not many, but obviously I would enter all the colors that are within my organization style sheet. So this is a tips about colors. So again, what Maya showed you, you had to do that all the time, but those 2 configurations that I just talked about, you do it once and then it will always help your users. Third tips is if you're unsure about publishing a dataset, for example, you've been asked by a specific department to publish a dataset in their names, and you don't want to make it public yet, you want these people to check first, then you can obviously go to the security tab of this dataset and decide, well, those people should have access to this dataset, not the entire public yet, and I want them to check. So how would you do that? So you might think that you will need to go on users and groups and immediately give some sort of permission, such as browse all datasets. So this would be not enough restrictive. Those permissions are domain restrictions. It means that whatever you give them here, it will apply to all the dataset, all the pages on your domain. So if you go here and you say, I've added my colleague, I've add the permission browse all datasets, then this colleague will see everything. And that's not what you will want all the time. So what you might want to do is first check that your colleague is indeed a user of the portal. And if it's not the case, then you enter the email and you invite this colleague. And then if you want to give the permission to a group of colleagues, for example, working in the same department rather than one sole individual, you might even want to group those people. So say I'm creating a transportation group and I'm adding 3 colleagues in this transportation group. And then when I want to publish this Vancouver's Bikeways datasets, if I'm still in a restricted mode, well, what I will do is add not just the individuals one by one, but I can add the group. And whether I'm adding individuals one by one or the group of colleagues, I can then say, well, that user will see the dataset even though it's still restricted. And I can say more, I can say this user can only see this column or this column, or using what we just learned with Maya, we can even filter the records this user will be able to see. So again, imagine that we had year of constructions. We could say, well, the user will only see things from within last year. So you really have a high granularity in terms of security. And it's a good habit to just say, I will have some of my colleagues check this data set, make sure that we make it great before publishing it for everybody. Because if the public starts looking at a data set and they feel that you don't have enough visualization, you don't have a good graph, a good custom view, you don't have enough metadata, maybe if you improve it later, that user won't know and it will stay on this first impression that maybe there wasn't enough done on this specific data set. The fourth good tip is when you're pushing a data set forward, maybe you should look at all the possible configurations. And what's tricky here is that those configurations, So let's go again on this data set. If I look at the standard configuration, I have just a few options because you don't want to give too many options to the general audience, because then if they have too many options, they will be overwhelmed. So we want to make it simple here. But as an administrator, it's a good tip for you to go edit this data set in an advanced mode. And here you'll have options that are very useful. So one option is to rename your series. So here it's some length. Maybe you want to have a more explicit label. So it's very tiny here in this gray box, but you do have interesting submenus. And one of them is indeed this label option. And I could say here length of lanes built. And instead of just this sum of length, you will have length of lanes built. You could also say, well, here and here, I see that I have a peak, but I want to be more specific. I want to know exactly the number, and I want to know the number by just looking at the graph, not hovering on those columns. So what I can do is on appearance here, say I would display the values on the chart. Now a colleague of yours is looking at this graph and say, well, that's great, and it really says when we built a lot of lanes, but what we needed is also just a historical overview of the cumulative length of lanes constructed. So here I can say, well, I want cumulative. I will do first maybe a line, and I will say I want something cumulative. So it's over the years, the evolution of lanes. And now we see that, in the late 80s, I had, under 40,000. And now I have, at least in 2018, we had more than 300,000. So maybe it gives another picture, not a better picture, but depending on the message you want to communicate, it might be interesting to do community. Then a last tip is, how do I do a refresh of my homepage? Maybe a lot of you have started an open data site a while ago, and you want to change completely your homepage. Well, to do that, you can use some of our templates. So if you go in the page section, I'm sure you're familiar with it, but what we suggest is just a raw HTML CSS editor when you can type absolutely everything, but you can also choose from one of our templates here. So we just put a few, and if you've been on Discovery, that you have more templates available on Discovery in this section. So you have actually way more than 4 templates, but here you have the very, very big ones for home pages. And let's say we choose homepage editorial. Before we can save it, we need to give it a URL name. So maybe homepage. I save it, and then I open the page and I can explore. So I see that. And this is a template, which means that then you need to edit all the variables, all the text bits. And to do that, you would go in your editor and you would just replace, if I say welcome to, test portal, for example, I would save and refresh, and I would immediately see my new name. If I want to change a specific section, well, I would just, search for, title, and I will see with the little arrows where I have to change my text. You might also wonder how you change icons. So the icons, as those are those guys, these font awesome libraries, and you have a lot of icons you can use to change that. So again, then if you want to browse more templates, you have the Discovery site. Okay, so we are already way over time, even though we didn't start the the question if you had questions. But then let me show you the resources. You might know the Help Hub. That's our main help page where you'll find the user guides, the discovery tips, the glossary, the widget documentation, the APIs, the tutorials. The widget documentation has been redone recently. That's this guy. And then obviously ODS Academy. So you may know that we've been doing a lot of work in the past months to push more content, more interactive content. And so we are hoping to add more and more courses on this website. So I don't know if there were questions. So we're ready. Okay. Well, I guess everything was crystal clear because I don't think any questions on these tips. Again, as we said at the very beginning, and when I started talking, we'll send those slides. So actually, you have, on the slides all the information, and you will also be able to watch again this presentation. We are hoping to do more and more of these formats and maybe to more advanced ones. So if you take the survey about this workshop, do not hesitate also to share what you're looking in the future in terms of contents, both for ODS Academy and for those workshops. So I don't know, Mayara, if you have anything to add.
No, just again, thanks a lot for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again on, as Philippe said, on maybe a more advanced one.
Okay. Well, so have a great evening, everybody, or a great day for those who are on the Easter side, and looking forward to seeing you in another session.
Bye-bye. Thank you.